Everyone has a soft spot for the tank, even from the most insane, warmongering maniacs who think things were better when we lined up and stabbed each other, to the most diehard pacifist who thinks you're a bad person for playing shooter games. Everyone thinks tanks are just neat, and why wouldn't they? It's a giant metal box with an artillery gun on it. The early ones were a new and terrifying force on the battlefield, and the newer ones are as fast as cars, have wall hacks, and can be damn near functionally invisible at night. It's almost enough to make me appreciate having to pay over $1,000 a month for medical costs. Tanks are awesome, and in the wonderful world of Warhammer, tanks are still awesome. Even you have to admit, Space Marine fans, that while Primarchs can be cool, and Marines are spectacular, there's a level of awe that you can only feel when a BANEBLADE rolls around a corner. It's the magical middle ground for me. Not so insane like Titans, where it completely shatters reality, but not so grounded that I can't see it fitting in Warhammer's constant barrage of nonsense. So today I come to you to of course talk about tanks, but also to remind you everything you thought was cool when you were 12 still is. Tanks, explosions, Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. Sometimes we don't need deep character analysis. Sometimes I don't want to hear about how X character from X faction is actually the bee's knees and the coolest person ever. Sometimes all we need is to watch something big make something else big explode while rock music plays in the background. But before I begin, let me ask you a question. Are you listening to this video in bed? No worries if so, I do that frequently. In that case, may I introduce you to Manta Sleep, the sponsor of this video. Manta Sleep makes sleep masks, but not just any sleep masks. Manta Sleep makes the most luxurious and comfortable sleep masks ever conceived, with a different kind for whatever your preference may be. Want to listen to some music or a podcast as you fall asleep? 2 different kinds of sound masks are available. Want an extra soft feel? The silk mask is absolutely perfect. Do you want just an all-around good sleeping mask? The Manta Pro Sleep Mask is old, reliable, and all-around great sleeping mask. I'm a big fan of the weighted sleeping mask. It's just the right amount of pressure when I go to sleep. Not at all heavy, but a comfortable amount of weight to help me shut my eyes for the night. If you'd like to get yourself one of the finest sleeping aids on the planet, I've got just the thing for you. Head to mantasleep.com and use code Pancreas for 10% off your order. That's mantasleep.com and code Pancreas for 10% off your order. You deserve to rest your best, so get yourself a Manta Sleep Mask today for a peaceful night. Now then, time to slam 8 beers, put on Kickstart My Heart, and raid the Armor Depot for a joyride. Yes, I have been binging Laser Pig lately, why do you ask? Hi, Postscript Colin here. Turns out writing scripts in advance can make me look like a fool. There was a balancing update between me writing the script and posting the video, so as a heads up, the point values are a bit off. I don't think they're off enough to affect the average player, but you might be down an enhancement or an extra unit for some armies. Or up an extra enhancement. By the way, just a little heads up for you. Please don't crawl out my ass too much. It would be a disservice to start with anything but the biggest supplier of tanks in Warhammer, and so we shall begin with the classics. The faction that only sends out infantry so they can get shot instead of the tanks. And what else can we start off with but the most ubiquitous tank of the Guard, the Leman Russ. Naturally named after the Primarch, it was in fact rediscovered by an expedition led by said Primarch sometime during the Great Crusade. While I couldn't find any specifics on the nature of the STC it came from, if I had to guess I would honestly assume it was a farming tractor, and one that might have been designed as a joke or with historical nostalgia in mind. Looking at it, it clearly brings to mind the tanks of World War I, most prominently the British Mark V from the shape of the main body. And while it was actually discovered very early on in the Imperium of man's history, damn near the very beginning in fact, it still feels like something out of 40k rather than the Great Crusade itself. In fact, we're going to go through the reasons this thing sucks before we get to why it's awesome, because in the spirits of tanks being awesome, I want to get the bad stuff out of the way first here. You can find in the novel Warhawk an Imperial Army tank commander lamenting all of the reasons that the Leman Russ is the single worst thing to ever be produced en masse by the Imperium of Man. The least impressive sounding of the complaints is that there are 0 comfortable things about this tank. That sounds like the most silver spoon-fed complaint ever, but I'm not talking about plush seats and the finest of wines next to the ammo. I mean that this thing is a metal box with basically 0 ventilation or room for the crew to move around with any degree of freedom. This is the kind of thing that tires the crew out, and so after enough time fighting, the crew might just pass out from exhaustion, even if the tank itself isn't damaged. But speaking of damage, the only easy way out of the tank is a hatch that's right over the main turret, so if something goes wrong, you're scrambling over both the main weapon itself and the ammo for it, which means by the time you're able to get free of the tank, it's likely already exploded a million times over. As far as actual protection goes, it's also still a World War I tank. Designs and techniques for armoring tanks has come a long way, even in the 100-odd years they've been around in real life. For something whose first known appearance was the year 30,000 and was designed during the apex years of humanity's technology, this thing wouldn't look out of place in the Somme. It's also the most obvious target around. Now, it's a tank. It's expected to take heavy fire at some point. But right now we're talking about something with the profile of that German Maus tank that doesn't have the same relative levels of armor to that monstrosity, and that thing was so big that bombers probably could have reliably hit it. Per Warhawk, the only thing short of a skyscraper a Leman Russ could conceivably hope to hide behind and cover was another Leman Russ. It's also incredibly slow, not even reaching 30 kilometers an hour, which for those of you who also speak freedom units means this thing tops out at 18 miles an hour. You can drive a Leman Russ at max speed through a school zone and you won't get a ticket. Theoretically, it could get about 40 miles an hour if properly maintained and equipped, but this is 40k. Theoretical maximums exist solely in Gilliman's mind. The practicals are that slow as hell 18 miles an hour. It's also so loud internally that the crew needs a Vox system to communicate with each other. The rear armor and side armor is so vulnerable that without supporting infantry it's almost certain to get destroyed from those angles, and once again coming from Warhawk, sometimes the interior just lights on fire. If you take away nothing else from all these downsides, surely you can understand that a tank that sometimes spontaneously combusts is not a good tank. So, why is this thing actually amazing? Well, for one, all those missing safety features and ways to make the crew more comfortable become substantially less important when you consider that the Imperium of Man does not view soldiers as people. In the Imperial Guard, you are a number, and if it takes 10 of you to kill one enemy of mankind, then that's a positive elixir trade right there, baby. And as a vehicle, it itself embodies that same viewpoint towards your forces. 1 destroyed Leman Russ is nothing. 100 destroyed Leman Russes is nothing. This is one of the only vehicles, hell, maybe one of the only things, period, that the Imperium has lost basically zero ability to manufacture and replace. Through 10,000 years of constant degradation, the Leman Russ has survived it all perfectly as a design. This is because pound for pound it's so cheap and easy to produce that combined with the Imperium not caring about its people means that you have the ultimate weapon of war right here. A guard army dedicated to armored warfare is going to throw tens of thousands of things at you, and while it is a piece of shit, it's a piece of shit with a very big, very scary gun on top of it. In fact, because it's so commonplace, I think it's one of the few things in the Imperium that's frequently modified without the Mechanicus throwing too much of a hissy fit. For a bit of a detour, part of why the Mechanicus hates when people mess with stuff, aside from greed and the risk of someone accidentally turning on a solar system destroyer, is because everything in the Imperium needs to be able to fit with STC technology to some level. If it can't be standardized to some degree, it becomes monstrously inefficient to produce. Well, the Leman Russ is so brain-dead simple to operate and so versatile a weapons platform that any change you could possibly make is either something that already exists somewhere, or so simple to fit into existing production lines it may as well be a standard. There is no one-size-fits-all solution in war, but the Leman Russ comes damn close to reaching that goal. And nuclear annihilation, I guess, but sometimes even the Imperium wants to keep a planet intact. It's also got a bit of the M4 Sherman in it in terms of overall reliability. In moment to moment, oh, the Leman Russ blows, but fixing one of them? A Sherman just needed duct tape and spit to fix if something went wrong in the field. A Leman Russ only needs one or the other. If this tank isn't outright destroyed, you can count it as battle ready by the end of the day, because even the strictest of tech priests would be willing to let the guardsmen handle repairs on this thing themselves if they really needed to. For actual combat, it also does have a few tricks up its sleeve. Its front is quite well armored, at least for how thick the armor is, and while its sides and rear aren't, it can actually turn remarkably quickly. It can also go from full speed to 0 and then reverse on a dime, so while you aren't getting anywhere fast, if you need to turn around even an entire column of these things, it's no issue. And when the guard fights alongside a Leman Russ, it does quite effectively bolster their morale. Those inside of it probably aren't too happy, but those around them are receiving armored support against enemies that their flashlights probably wouldn't be bothering much otherwise. Even the same tank commander in Warhawk who hated this thing by the end of the novel had come to appreciate it. It may be a pile of garbage, but it was a pile of garbage that kept its crew alive. The Leman Russ is a dumpster fire of a tank, even by in-universe standards, but it's a dumpster fire that just as often as not starts burning the enemies of mankind alongside itself. For stats, here's the Leman Russ battle tank. Now, those of you who are far bigger shovelheads than I am will know that there are approximately 1 trillion variations of the Leman Russ. I simply do not care. They all stem from this same base kit, and I'm pretty sure the datasheets have started to merge into being just one big one with all the possible choices on the same thing. If you want to know which which variation is which, pick one of the different weapons on here and then go look up which one it's specifically for. Hello, post-production me here again. Another correction to make. The different datasheets do still exist with slightly different options for weapons, but the main difference is in the special rules that they have. Like an Executioner gets a +1 to hit against half-strength units. Nothing I think is worth going every single model's point cost and whatnot for, but another heads up as I realized something after this was done. This time I'm not tardy to the party, I'm just stupid. As for what we're looking at right now, you can kit the Leman Russ to fill any battlefield role. It can have a las cannon, so all but Titans and other super heavies will be vulnerable to this thing. Its main battle cannon is no slouch either, with a random amount of attacks, but potentially up to 9, all at strength 10, AP 1, and damage 3. All those weapons hit on 4s, mind you, so accuracy is consistent across the board. You can give it plasma cannons, heavy flamers, heavy bolters, multi-meltas, and plenty more. Between all the different variations of the Leman Russ, you can find one that does whatever you need. It may not do it perfectly, but it will work in a pinch. It also rerolls hit rolls of 1 against enemies nearby an objective, and if you don't control the objective yourself, you can reroll all hit rolls. Very powerful ability right there, compensating for what is otherwise a 50-50 shot of whether or not you'll hit. For pure stats, it's got 10 inches of movement, toughness 12, a 2-up save, 13 wounds, leadership 7, and OC 3. The objective control doesn't really matter because this thing should be blasting away at enemies, not trying to muscle in on the turf of your waves of meat shields trying to take the objective after this thing has done its work. But the rest of it ain't bad for 185 points. I wouldn't call it amazing in the game, but it is very good. Especially since it's so cheap, even in a small 500-point game you can fit one in no problem, and losing even 3 of them in a bigger game can mean you still have a chance at winning as long as you play them intelligently. Not the best tank, not the best attacks, but you can take enough Leman Russes that it just doesn't matter. And it also has a melee attack that hits its strength 7. It's not glamorous because it's just a tank commander going driver, treads, enemy combatants, or whatever the tank crew way to say run over those people I don't like is, but again, it can do the job if you really need it to. As GW themselves said, it's a shame it took so long for the Primarch who held Terra itself to finally get a tank named after him. I'll skip ahead a bit and tell you GW did a real funny for this model on the tabletop by making it $105 to the Leman Russ's $70, but that's Warhammer for you. For its lore, there's not really much to say. It's an Imperial tank. It's an upgrade to the Leman Russ all around, but not quite up to the snuff of a BANEBLADE. GW themselves haven't had much to say about it, but there is some small amount of info to be gained from community posts and whatnot. It's apparently got a few more supplies inherently part of its kit, like cooking equipment and bedrolls, not game-changing in battle, but going a long way when it comes to keeping the crew fit for battle. The Imperium being what it is, I have to assume that this thing was either A, found in a bin like all STCs are, or B, someone like Call or another radical tech priest's baby. And in combat, while it can keep up with the lighter Leman Russes in spite of being heavier due to its more effective engines, it's largely deployed in concert with infantry squadrons rather than as part of an armored unit. You send in some guardsmen, then you send in some more guardsmen, and then have a tank follow them around like a bodyguard. For the tabletop, it sure is a Leman Russ but better. Stat-wise, the improvements are 18 wounds instead of 13, toughness 12 instead of 11, and OC 5 instead of 3. While it can't take the Hunter missile for a once-a-game strength 14 hit, its oppressor cannon is a las cannon with potentially lower damage and less AP in exchange for being able to hit potentially 9 times and at a whopping 72 inches of range compared to the las cannon's 48 inches of range. Even if the oppressor cannon just had 4 shots instead of D6 plus 3, I'd say that's still better than the las cannon through sheer volume of fire, because the las cannon usually only has 1 shot. The Rogal Dorn's main battle cannon is also just an upgraded Leman Russ cannon, because that is almost the exact same profile, but it's also twin-linked, meaning you can always reroll wound rolls. It has plenty of weapon options to choose from, just like the Leman Russ, and while you can't reroll hits against enemies near objectives, you can once a game reduce an incoming attack's damage to 0, so it really is just a Leman Russ but better, or alternatively a baby BANEBLADE. And I'm not being dismissive with that, because all those Warhammer community posts say basically the same thing. It's also bigger than a Leman Russ, which yeah doesn't mean it's more of a target, but it can take more heat and that adds variety to the guard arsenal visually, which is always a plus. Overall, if real life money isn't an issue, a Rogal Dorn is a better Leman Russ for about 60 points more as of time of recording this video, and I have to imagine that even as stats change, that'll stay constant. There is one final thing of note, of course, which is that the Rogal Dorn battle tank model is unfinished. The fanbase had a lovely time making fun of it when it released, because at the bottom of the tank is just a big hole. It is easy to make fun of, but for once I think GW deserves the slightest amount of credit here. The bottom likely wasn't added to the model to make more room on the sprue for weapon options and whatnot, meaning when you get your new Mini, you receive more weapons and options, as opposed to a part of the tank you're never going to be looking at. Now in a proper world, would GW give you about half a cent's tops worth of plastic more and just make the box a little bit bigger? Yeah, they would do that. But in the grand list of things GW has done to complain about, it really ain't that bad. Plus, you can always just pretend that it's actually powered like a Flintstone car and the crew are just yabba-dabba doing their way across the battlefield. Or find something like a Wraith Knight and model it so that the Wraith Knight is using the Rogal Dorn tank in place of its sword. But while the Leman Russ is iconic, and the Rogal Dorn does look pretty great, especially compared to other factions' new minis like the poor Blood Angels, the BANEBLADE is the ultimate tank of the Imperium of Man. Coming at us from as early as the days of Epic still being a game instead of whatever the hell Titanicus is, probably pretty fun in all honesty, but I'm not playing it, the 11 Barrels of Hell have been with us since nearly the beginning. During the days of the Great Crusade, when the Imperium was still just as brutal a regime, but at least functioned far more efficiently, there used to be entire battalions of BANEBLADEs. Hundreds of these things all deployed at once, because even by the standards of the time when Space Marines were legions, sometimes you really just needed to evaporate whatever you're looking at. Naturally, as time went on, the Imperium's industry degraded and BANEBLADEs became less and less common. By the time of the 41st millennium, you did not get entire armies of BANEBLADEs in anything short of a massive crusade fleet. Most Imperial Guard regiments would be happy to have a single BANEBLADE, though of course every now and again something like Dawn of War happens and 100 of them at once are mobilized. And then the Imperium somehow loses 100 BANEBLADEs, also like in Dawn of War. Maybe they dropped them down a sewer or something. In the earliest days, at least in real life when it was an epic, the BANEBLADE was always the premier super heavy tank as it is in modern 40k, but by the standards of epic scale, it was a medium vehicle. Now granted, this was epic, where the BANEBLADE was competing with things like Titans for the heavy category, as well as those squat abominations that were equal parts a child's drawing of a tank and a portable Death Star. Still very funny to imagine looking at a BANEBLADE and going, ah yes, a medium amount of firepower. Much like the Leman Russ, there are a massive amount of BANEBLADE variations, both because having more options is always good, and because GW always needs you to buy more stuff. The majority of them have been produced on Mars, and sure enough, the Mars pattern BANEBLADE is the gold standard for every one of the machines. The Lucius pattern BANEBLADE from Forge World Lucius, and no, Lucius the Eternal wasn't involved, it's just a very unfortunate coincidence, is another standout, being similar to the Mars pattern but more heavily armored and with a bigger engine to compensate. Every BANEBLADE gets a unique serial number and is as well documented as anything in the Imperium can be, because even the Administratum and Mechanicum know that these things are worth paying attention to. Whenever one of these things is lost, the Mechanicus will go insane to try and recover it, even at a cost of lives that arguably isn't worth the BANEBLADE. The Imperium can still make more BANEBLADEs, albeit in greatly reduced numbers, though given that a BANEBLADE is advanced enough that the Mechanicus will likely consider it substantially holy, this does track. The constructions of these things is actually fairly decent, with exhaust ports to let buildup of gases and presumably excess heat out, as well as autoloaders, which I'm less comfortable in saying if they're inherently good or not in a tank. While of course not quite as operator-friendly as a modern-day tank, it is less garbage to exist in than a Leman Russ. Hell, it's big enough that you could live in a destroyed one if the Mechanicus for some reason didn't reclaim it immediately. As I said earlier, there's BANEBLADE variants that exist for any role, and while I won't go over all of them, I'll at least mention the standard BANEBLADE and my favorite subgenre of overcompensating tank. As an aside before I start though, I really do love looking at tabletop and connecting it to lore to show how powerful something can be, at least within the Warhammer universe. Case in point, the BANEBLADE's tabletop stats. Tell me, viewer, do you want a tank to properly feel like a tank? Because sometimes a tank doesn't quite feel like a tank in Warhammer, but a BANEBLADE sure does. At 12 inches of movement, 13 toughness, a 2-up save, and 24 entire wounds, this thing is monstrous. No invuln save, but against all but the toughest of AP weapons, that doesn't matter. At 13 toughness, you can confidently wade into even heavier firepower of other factions, because nothing short of entire dedicated squads of Melta-Blasts or Titan-grade weaponry are gonna hurt this thing. For weaponry, would you like to hit someone with 9 strength 14 attacks at -3 AP and d6 damage, with blast because infantry deserve the worst, because this thing can, multiple las cannons, multiple flamers, multiple bolters. A BANEBLADE is not what you send in when you're looking for a specific solution or something discreet. A BANEBLADE is what you send in when everything in an area code needs to go away immediately. Its special rule also gives friendly infantry cover if even a single model in this unit is hidden behind the BANEBLADE. It's 480 points, so we veered into the territory of losing your BANEBLADE crippling you, but it's so big, tanky, and powerful that it will at least make some points back before it goes down. down. If it goes down, for that matter, because a toughness 13 dealing with a Baneblade requires a dedicated force. That does incidentally mean that if you bring a Baneblade to a friendly game without informing the other person, you're a prick, but hey, sometimes you gotta make a statement. Also, since I feel obligated to bring up some flaws, this thing is gonna be hell to navigate if you're playing on something like a cramped city map. It just straight up might not fit down certain pathways, so be a bit careful about that. Like I said, I'm not gonna go through every variant of Baneblade, because much like the Leman Russ, there's enough of them that the blanket statement of you can find one for the job largely holds true. But I will talk about the Shadow Sword because it's funny. You see these rules right here. You want to wound a Knight on a 2-up, you want to wound a goddamn Warlord Titan on a 3-up, because for only 440 points, you can. In fact, in theory, a single one of these things can immediately destroy a Warhound Scout Titan. Assuming every shot wounds, it would take at least 3 turns meanwhile for this thing to destroy a Warlord, which would be rather unlikely to happen because the Warlord would likely ass-blast it out of existence. But I love the fact that for 440 points, you can ensure anyone who brings a Titan to your mega game has to pay attention to what's on the field. It's got devastating wounds too, so if you roll a 6, there is no saving against it, you just get hurt. And if Warlord Titans are in play by your opponent, I'm assuming you have also spent an absurd amount of money on Warhammer. Bring 2 Shadow Swords then. Hell, bring 3. It's wonderful, this thing. On the tabletop, this is what you bring to tell your friend to shove their mortgage payment Forge World brick up their ass. And in universe, it's an interesting and fun thing to show that the Guard may be lesser than everyone else, but even they have weapons capable of taking down Titans. There are, of course, a lot of other things that might be classified as a tank, but nothing to me that warrants too much detail for a couple of reasons. Chief among them being feeling, which is an entirely whack thing to say from a real military classification standpoint, but 40k entirely runs on feelings and vibes, so I will say it's valid in order to not have to do more work. The Hydra, for instance, is in fact a tank technically. It's a tank dedicated to taking down aircraft, but per the official GW web store at least, it is classified as a tank. And googling anti-aircraft tanks does return various vehicles that look like tanks and have AA guns on them. But let's brainstorm real quick, viewer. Say you're playing a battlefield game. You need armored support because they're pushing Seaside with their own armor, or alternatively, you need armored support because the entire enemy team has decided that B is the place to be. If your friend rolls up in an AA tank to help you out, you're gonna feel upset. I respect the Hydra because AA fire is always a good thing to have, don't get me wrong. My favorite thing to do in Battlefield 5 was build AA guns like a little rat and then make sure whoever was piloting on the enemy team had a bad day. But it ain't quite a tank, you know? The Macleod Defender, too. It's certainly scary because it has a Demolisher cannon. In fact, looking at the rules, it's great if you want something at strength 14 for only about 2/3 the cost of a Baneblade. But it looks more like self-propelled artillery than a proper tank, even if the range on the Demolisher cannon isn't any greater here. Plus, it really is just what I said. Cheaper, shittier Baneblade. There's only so many ways to make talking about something like that interesting, even if Macleod getting his own tank named after him is nice. Also, don't get it, because for real-world money, it's pretty shit. It costs $176 on the web store and is 280 points. The Baneblade and all its variants cost $185 and are all around 450 to 500 points. And this thing is also part resin. Just get a Baneblade, Chief. If you're already gonna buy a Macleod, spend the extra $10 and get another few hundred points worth of mini. The Guard is already one of the most expensive armies in the hobby. There's no need to make it 10 times so in the name of squeezing every single point value you can get out of a vehicle. The Hellhound is a tank, though. Not the most iconic one, but flame tanks combine flamethrowers and tanks. Sure, it means you're not best suited to fight other armored vehicles, but flamethrower tank. That's cool. Flushing enemies out of cover has never been easier. Just roll up to their trench and start lighting them up. As a bonus, the rules of this thing even force a unit it shoots at to lose the benefit of cover rule if they had it, so you can rest easy knowing that this was purpose-built for that. I'm just not talking about this one very much because A, it's very simple and not the most iconic thing ever, so it lacks all the love the Baneblade and Leman Russ got, and B, it's built on the same chassis as a Chimera, which is an armored troop transport and not a tank. Yes, there is a difference. I may be too ignorant to properly know all the reasons they're different, but I know they're different. Anyways, other factions have tanks too, so how about we discuss those lads a bit? Tempted as I am to say all Space Marines are basically tanks and call it a day, I will give them some credit and say they have a few things that count as tanks, chief among them of course being the Predator. Now from the standpoint of GW selling us cool and unique models, older Space Marine tanks have the problem of almost all being variations on the exact same vehicle chassis. In fact, looking at almost every vehicle adjacent thing the Space Marines have on the web store, if it isn't a Dreadnought, Land Speeder, or Flyer, it probably has the same core of the Rhino metal box. So once again, it's up to the vibes I get to determine if it is or isn't a tank, and the Predator wins that contest. In much the same way as the Leman Russ, and indeed in the same way Space Marines used to be all-rounders capable of dealing with anything at once, the Predator tank has multiple different variants for different situations. Much like the rest of what the Space Marines use, Predators are in many ways a holy thing, even beyond the obvious of them being technology and therefore something the Mechanicus gets a boner over. Predators are the tanks of the Emperor's Angels. Every 13th one built is extra blessed, every 666th one is immediately melted back down and instead sacrificed to the machine god, and I cannot tell if that is the dumbest or coolest thing ever. Given that this is 40k, I'm gonna go with a resounding both. Even after they're finished, the religious practices do not end, because they're only named after the Emperor's tarot is consulted. It's believed that the name of the tank influences its behavior, and Predators have been observed to have machine spirits intelligent enough to potentially be considered true AI. Not that the Mechanicus would ever admit to that, of course. According to Index Astartes, the Predator was actually also designed during the Dark Age of technology, and was not only instrumental in helping establish countless colonies, but also in humanity's first fights against the Orcs. Orcs being ever present as they are, we don't often think about how Dark Age humanity probably had to fight them, but it makes sense they did. It's actually a funny middle ground now that I think about it. The Eldar had advanced so far ahead that they didn't need to care about the Greenskins anymore, so humanity may have filled the role of galactic power that was on pest control duty. The Predator helped greatly in that regard, and since it was such a great vehicle, the Emperor gave it to the Space Marines. Originally, there was more room for a decent amount of people to be transported, but over time, more and more transport room was traded out for more ammunition storage, and we got ourselves a main battle tank. As mentioned earlier, the Predator comes in variations for almost everything you can think of. The ball pattern Predator is designed for urban combat and dealing with swarms, for example, but is only available to the Blood Angels because they refuse to share it. For rules, however, I'll just talk about the Predator Destructor, because it's a good solid vehicle that can do just about anything. The Predator Destructor comes on in with 10 movement, 10 toughness, a 3-up save, 11 wounds, leadership 6, and OC 3. With the old reliable Hunter-Killer missile as a potential armament, it otherwise can have las cannons for high-strength targets, the Predator autocannon to deal with damn near anything, and a variety of bolters to deal with the weaker enemies of the Imperium. Its specialty is in some way infantry, because it gets an extra point in AP for when it targets infantry with a shooting attack, but realistically that's just a nice bonus for a tank that can fairly comfortably slot into any role. At only 140 points, it gives a nice kick for its cost. Given that it's actually a bit weaker than even Leman Russ, it certainly isn't the star tank of the Imperium, but it's cheaper and she's a nice bit of armored support that will do you well. Makes me wonder though, is the Predator actually better than the Leman Russ, or is that simply something said to tide the Marines over, since they don't really need vehicles all that often? Is it just a balancing decision for tabletop, or did someone at GW's Rule HQ forget that Marines are supposed to be better than the Guard? I was incidentally going to talk about the Land Raider also, but it isn't a true tank. It is very much a troop transport, just one with such heavy firepower that you can immediately start treating it like a tank after everyone hops out. For the sake of trying to stick to theme here, I won't include it, but to be entirely honest with you, you could vomit out its troops and then immediately begin field it like a tank. It'll be fine. As for our other Space Marine tank, the Primaris Gladiator. When the Primaris came out, even the Space Marine vehicles weren't immune to being Primarisified, with it being the first of the new tanks to emerge from Call's basement, and unfortunately to my knowledge does not have the fun character of the previous vehicles. No grand stories of the Great Crusader earlier, which is understandable, but also no fun tales like Rin's Might, because why fill the setting with cool background lore when we can release another fucking Horus Heresy book after it ended? Rules. Rules, please save me from this lore hell. The Gladiator Lancer is the most tank-looking one because it just has one big cannon, so we'll talk about that one's rules. At 10 movement, 10 toughness, a 3-up save, 12 wounds, leadership 6, and 3 OC, it's a tank. It is indeed followed in the Predator's footsteps as a mainline tank. The Lancer Laser Destroyer is rocking up with 14 strength at 72 inches of range, because go to hell, people who bought Imperial Knights. You can replace its bolters with grenade launchers, which unless I'm blatantly missing something I don't know why you wouldn't do. You can give it a rocket pod if you hate flyers, and whenever it shoots you can reroll a single hit roll, wound roll, and damage roll. At 160 points as of this moment, you get yourself something with a strength 14 weapon that can shoot across the table. You might as well if you're going to be fighting anything with even a slightly high toughness score. There will be 3 more tanks coming forward. I will be honest with you, I feel really gross calling this first upcoming one a tank. The Scorpius Disintegrator. This thing reminds me of that one droid tank from Star Wars, but with less sauce. Calling this thing a tank feels weird because I don't know, it just looks wrong. All we really know about it is that it's another vehicle heavily using Dark Age of Technology tech, so no one knows how it really works, and it hovers. That's all I got for lore, and quite frankly, it's only here because if I'm talking about vehicles, you feel obligated to bring up the Adeptus Mechanicus. For rules, it's fine. If you want a tank, it's the best you can get here. 10 movement, 10 toughness, a 3-up save, 12 wounds, leadership 6, and OC 3. If I hadn't seen the model first and someone described solely its profile to me, I would accept that that is indeed a tank, right up until they put it on the board and I just stared at them wondering when the joke was going to end. The Ferromite cannon on this thing is a las cannon, but better because it has more attacks. The energy cannon you can take instead is good for dealing with hordes, albeit with a rather random amount of attacks you can get at 2d6. The missile launcher sure is a missile launcher for dealing with tougher groups of units. You have a tank, Mechanicus. I think. For the sisters, oh thank God, they actually have a tank. The Castigator. Look at her. Isn't she beautiful and actually looks like a tank? It is in all ways quite the hand-me-down as far as tanks go, and I think that extends to the lore as well, because all I could ever find on it is other people mentioning how it sure is built on a Predator chassis. But hey, at least it gives the sisters an actual proper tank. I'm sure it's given even more holy maintenance than the original Predator, because these are the Sisters of Battle, and if it isn't practically glowing gold in the warp, it isn't a Sororitas vehicle. For rules, classic tank. 10 movement, 10 toughness, 3-up save, and now we have a 6-up invuln save as well, 11 wounds, 7 leadership, and 3 OC. It's got the Hunter-Killer missile, either Strength 9 autocannons or a Strength 10 main cannon, bolters for chaff. It's not the tankiest tank to ever tank, but if you're playing the Sisters of Battle and just want a tank, then it's all you got, and it isn't bad. 160 points to have a tank isn't a sin. Plus that invuln save in some ways makes it tankier than most else I've talked about so far. It even gives friendly units an extra point in AP against a targeted shot at this turn, which is something the nuns with guns will no doubt appreciate. And to round us off, the Custodes. Not the most traditional of tanks, but they do have something more like one than the Mechanicus and their weird life raft hovercraft thing. The Legio Custodes Caladius Grav Tank, or just the Caladius for those of you who don't want to trip over your own sentences. It's right on the edge of being so goofy it's badass like all the best Warhammer things are, so whether or not you love or hate it depends on which edge it falls over into for you personally. As we all know, Big E wanted only the best for his 10,000 companions. They get the finest of weapons and armor to the point that the Primarchs were their only competition, and their vehicles are no exception. Everything within it is made with not only technology from the Dark Age of Technology, but advances made throughout the Great Crusade that I would bet good money were in part made by the Emperor himself. If there was ever a project that demanded his personal touch, it'd be something for the Custard Marines. And sure enough, the Bananamobile is a devastating weapon. 10 movement, 11 toughness, a 2-up save with a 5-up invuln, 14 wounds, leadership 6, and 4 OC. It's got some strength 12 weapons with decent range and volume of attacks, an alternative mode at only strength 10 with rapid fire if we need a horde of tough targets to disappear, and a strength 6 weapon for lighter targets or to mop up a weakened foe. The lower strength accelerator cannon gets lethal hits against non-monstrous and non-vehicle enemies, while the heavy blaze cannon gets lethal hits against monstrous and vehicle enemies. At 215 points, it's a bit pricier than most of what we talked about, but with how tough it is and the firepower it can bring out, not a bad choice at all. Pricey is relative. This thing is great for what you're paying for. Just decide on if the biggest of bananas is something you can stomach to look at as part of your army. If you can, you're just as golden as the Custodes. If you can't, maybe just pick up another Dreadnought. The rest of the Imperial armies don't really have tanks, at least nothing unique or nothing I will classify as a tank, wrong though I may be. The Imperial agents are just a bunch of other armies' units, and for the Imperial Knights, no John, you are the tanks. Chaos tanks are also just Imperium tanks. When the Space Marines went traitor, they took their old stuff with them. Like damn, I wonder what a Chaos Predator or Chaos Land Raider performs like. What similarities could there possibly be? In the interest of saving time, I will quickly go through all the Xenos armies that are just disqualified. Tyranids, obviously no-go, they're all bug monsters. Necrons, no tanks. Some things like the Doomsday Ark are approaching tank territory with their rolls, but not quite hitting the mark. I should look at a tank and go, damn, that's a tank, not damn, that's some whack-ass alien thing. Maybe it's close-minded, and I'm sure getting hit by the Doomsday Ark's Strength 18 weapon will make me want to cry a bit, but I'm not calling that a tank. Genestealer cults are also off, because they have stolen trucks and not tanks. The Leagues of Votann, in spite of being dwarfs, don't really have what I would comfortably call a tank yet, and the Dark Eldar, to round off the rejects, just have boats. Some of those boats can hit very hard, but they're still just boats. So that leaves us with just the Craftworld Eldar, the Tau, and the Orcs, and we'll go in order of how tanky they are, starting with the Tau. The Hammerhead gunship is me being incredibly generous with calling it a tank, at least in terms of appearance. If you close your eyes almost completely and only look at it out of the corner of them, you can almost mistake it for a tank. But with its tabletop profile, it is a tank. Much like with the rest of the Tau's arsenal, it is simply better than 99% of what you're likely to see the Imperium field. Yes, the Imperium has the most advanced stuff ever in a basement, totally for sure, but that doesn't matter to the average guardsman getting outshot by a hunter cadre. In these settings, you'll notice that whenever GW releases something new, it tends to be the most kick-ass thing on the battlefield. The Hammerhead gunship, sure enough, was an example of this, where especially during the Damocles Crusade, entire Imperial offensive lines were annihilated by just a few hammerheads. Whenever you see a picture of guard tanks fighting Tau hammerheads and such, just keep in mind that immediately off screen is the end of a 3-mile-long burning Leman Russ armored column. With the range of the hammerhead actually being something closer to real-life engagement ranges, at least in the lore, Leman Russ commanders by the time of the Taros campaign were just refusing to march out into the field without a massive amount of information gathered first. They wanted to make sure they weren't going to roll out of base and immediately get obliterated by these things. Based on the Devilfish, the hammerhead of course has gravity propulsion to let it fly, as well as a variety of sensor systems, navigation systems, and every single bit of technology that when you just look at the tabletop, you call someone a nerd for caring about, because that isn't a big gun. But with these things, the Tau have outshot every guard tank that come their way, so perhaps there's something to it. The railgun on top fires with such force that it can pierce completely through a guard tank and suck the crew out through the exit hole through the sheer speed and force the projectile is going. This usually turns the unfortunate guardsman into something resembling chorizo. Dedicated drones can help spot for the ship, and unlike the Leman Russ, it has 2 hatches on the sides of the tank so pilots can quickly disembark in an emergency or if the tank is about to blow. And admittedly, it isn't dogfighting or anything like that. As much as I was rather rude towards it at first, its flying capability is closer to the Wraith from Halo. It hovers off the ground, sure, but only a few feet. It lets it traverse uneven terrain, but it doesn't fly. It really is a futuristic tank, much as I was dismissive of it. On the tabletop, the Hammerhead lives up to its lore reputation. The Accelerator to Burst Cannon or Pulse Carbine can get some shots off on weaker approaching units, same for the Smart Missile systems. The 2 Seeker missiles you can put on it pack some nice punch, and if you would like to take the Ion Cannon, it can do good work against tough but not too tough enemy units. Space Marines are only toughness 4 on average, fellas. That's wounding them on a 2. Wounding Custodians on a 3 for that matter. But come now, the railgun is what people care about, and its strength 20, AP 5, and D6 plus 6 damage, it's brutal. In theory, it only hits on a 4 and you only get 1 shot, but the targeting array feature means you can always reroll 1 wound or hit roll, which if you have the railgun means your only shot is getting rerolled if it needs to be. Not that you'll likely need to reroll the wound roll at strength 20. Plus, if you're targeting a vehicle or monster with the Hammerhead, you can add 1 to the hit roll. And I'm not done yet. It has a range of 72 inches and has heavy, so if you don't move, which you very well might not need to, you get another +1 to hit. Getting this thing to hit on 2s is not at all unreasonable, especially because the railgun is designed to be fired at other vehicles. At 145 points, if you're facing off against a lot of vehicles or monstrous units as a Tau player, bring this bad boy. Even if not for them, the Ion Cannon can do some good work, but the funny railgun that infuriates people is just heavenly, man. If someone complains about the tabletop balance of a strength 20 weapon on a 145 point hammerhead, you know what? Fair enough. I'm not smart enough to get into the nitty-gritty that well. But the people who play some named lore character and get angry when their character with 60 books about them gets obliterated by a bored Tau barely paying attention from across the battlefield, now that is where the wonder of tabletop lies. For the Eldar, we are a little bit more tanky, but that's just from appearance. Whereas the Hammerhead, you need to squint and look at it out of the corner of your eye for it to properly look like a tank. With the Fire Prism, you only need to do one or the other, and it'll look like a tank. As with everything Eldar, it's largely made out of Wraithbone, and as such is as solid or fragile as it needs to be. With the rune of the Eldar god Kurnos on it, Fire Prisms hunt out enemy armor in the name of their probably mostly kinda dead god and bring them to heal. With a big old crystal on top of it to fire laser beams out of and hovering off the ground with the grace of advanced Eldar technology, this is something you look at once and go, ah yes, this was indeed built by a space elf. Which naturally is part of why I love it. Aside from that, it's an Eldar vehicle and therefore very advanced, so I'm sure every component I complained about the Leman Russ lacking, like anything resembling comfort or not bursting bursting into flames at random has been addressed on this thing. It probably has Wi-Fi connection. But though the lore isn't too deep with this thing, the tabletop love only continues as the main reason I love it. The twin shuriken cannon or shuriken catapults are nice. They're solid for taking down anything trying to get too close, but the prism cannon is where the true beauty lies. You get 2 firing modes, each with 60 inch of range. The dispersed mode has 2d6 attacks, hitting on 3s it's strength 6, AP 2, and damage 2. With blast as well, if you roll well, this thing can be great at clearing out hordes of weaker infantry, especially against someone like the guard, but the true beauty comes from the focused fire mode. It does bring it down to only 2 attacks, but it's strength 18, AP 4, and damage 6, that's okay. This thing isn't much weaker than the Tau railgun and the Hammerhead, but we're not done yet, because if you have multiple fire prisms, you can link their fire. As long as they're in line of sight of each other, you can fire the fire prism from the back line as if it had the range and visibility of the one far ahead. There isn't a cap on this as far as I can see, so if for some reason you're playing a game of 40k with a 30-foot table and no terrain, your backline fire prism can still fire the focus blast as if it were barrel stuffing the enemy. Anyone bringing vehicles can just go straight to hell, because you're getting shot by 3 tanks even though only one of them is remotely close to you. You can also reroll 1 hit and wound roll when you shoot, just for one final middle finger. Since it hits on 3s, you are very likely to hit at least 1 shot between that and the rerolls. Like all Eldar things though, it's fast but not the toughest. It's got 14 inches of movement and fly, but only 9 toughness and 12 wounds. A 3-up save isn't bad at least, and leadership 7 and OC3 is largely standard for vehicles. But man, even though it's a bit weak, that linked ability with the other fire prisms can really make someone hate you with a burning passion if you bring a few of these against an armor-heavy list. Or hell, even against a horde army like Guard with that dispersed fire method. And finally, Orc Tanks. Orc Tanks in some ways can be the tankiest things around. By virtue of them loving to steal things, an Orc warboss can feasibly have their vehicles be nothing but looted Leman Russes, Baneblades, and the like. They'll certainly be damaged and infinitely less accurate, but covered in Orc gubbins and shoot 10 times as often for it. There aren't any rules for looted vehicles anymore to my knowledge, because that was a fun mechanic that probably made boring people upset, so of course it had to go, but who knows. The Battlefield 6 devs seem to be getting rid of the movement that 99% of people didn't want, and 1% of people only want because they're bad at actual movement shooters and want to do backflips in a game where you shouldn't be able to do backflips. Maybe one day GW will be cool again too, and bring back looted wagons. Anyways, Orc tanks aren't all just stolen property. There are 3 of what I would call a proper tank, although proper in the Orcish way, so it's a pile of garbage that works anyways. The gun wagon, the bonebreaker, and the standard battle wagon. They're all rolled into one datasheet and they all come from the same kit, so I'll just list all the things this thing can potentially have and leave you to figure out what a legal loadout actually is. That's the nice thing about playing Eldar, you know? You never have to wonder what a unit does, since it has like 2 variant loadouts max. For their lore though, I mean, what do you really want from me? The Orcs made this thing. Sometimes an Orc warboss wants to be able to move a bunch of boys up the field of battle without them getting shot at. Technically, this is a transport, but Orcs being Orcs, this transport cannot simply be a transport. It needs to be loud and shooty as well, and basically a tank. Orcs still being Orcs, it also needs to be covered in 20 tons of scrap armor minimum, and also needs to look like it'll fall apart in a moment's notice. No doubt in part because it likely will fall apart in a moment's notice. No 2 battle wagons will be the same, even though there's only so many ways to put one together with the model, so if you want to kit bash it, you have the complete blessings of the lore to put whatever you want on it. An Orc vehicle partially constructed out of Imperium, Necron, and Eldar tech isn't a lore-breaking abomination. It just means the Orc who built it has crumped a whole load of different gits over his career. On the tabletop, it's plenty Orky and can crump plenty of gits, though it does fall a bit short of being a true tank in some regards to its stats. For the stat line, it's fine. 10 movement, 10 toughness, 3-up save with a 6-up invuln, which is nice, 16 wounds, 7 leadership, and 5 OC. With those, it's a fine tank stat line. Its weapons aren't quite that tanky though. The melee weapons are actually pretty alright for a tank, especially since some of them are dedicated melee weapons. Nothing too phenomenal, but someone trying to get you in melee only to be hit with a surprise strength 10 melee weapon can be a big shock. Some of them have extra attacks too, so you can mix things up. The ranged weapons meanwhile are a complete mess, but in a fun, orky way. The big Shuda and Lava are different ways to deal with weaker units, as is the cannon's frag mode. The shell version of the cannon can deal with tougher units at strength 10, but only hitting on 5s with 1 shot means it isn't exactly reliable. The Kill-A-Cannon meanwhile is only strength 9, but with d6 plus 1 shots, it's a lot more reliable, if only through sheer weight of fire. But the Zap Gun, I don't even know, man. I'm stupid with the rules sometimes. I'm pretty sure in every single Necron video I've made, I've biffed at least one rule. But this thing really just hurts my brain. A weapon with one attack ain't great, though anti-vehicle 4+ does mean it can wound other tanks fairly reliably. And with AP 3 and 5 damage, it can hurt pretty bad. But that's strength value. D6 plus 6. Which sure is orky, I guess, but what do you even make of that? Random attacks, very good, that's fun and orky, or Scaveny if you prefer. Random damage, also can be fun times. Random strength, not a fan. This means the weapon can have a decent strength value for tanks, or it can be something barely sufficient to deal with heavier infantry, depending on your role. Maybe if it had more attacks I'd like it more, but as it is, this is not helping a battle wagon look much like a real tank. For additional stuff though, a battle wagon can do a decent amount of stuff. Anything attacking it has its own AP made worse, so AP isn't as strong against it as you might think. You can add 2 to the toughness of it, which can make it much tankier, but alternatively it is firing deck 11. Out of the 22 potential boys that can be in it, 11 of them can shoot out of it. You can also take Gaz in it if you don't mind him taking up 15 slots of the transport capacity. Now those may be the tanks of 40k, or at least what I consider the tanks worth looking at for the sake of fun, and obviously being a tank. But have you considered, fellas, there remains one more tank to be discussed? From Warhammer Fantasy's very own Empire of Man comes an honest-to-God tank, which half the 40k factions it feels like can't even match because at least it is a tank. To once again start negative and then get positive, let me tell you some of the rather shit features of this thing. Comfort doesn't exist. It was created during a Renaissance age civilization. It wasn't even created by an Imperial scholar for that matter, but a Tylean one named Leonardo of Miragliano, because of course that was what his name was. Only 12 were ever created, and between accidents or battle, only 8 remain. This is admittedly older lore because I believe Old World changed that, but either way they aren't common, even if in newer lore the Empire can build more. Fuel efficiency. Brother, this thing uses wood to move. It gets like 1,000 logs to the mile and moves at a brisk walking pace. Anything efficiency for that matter? This thing has wheels and was made with smithing techniques from the 1600s. It gets stuck in the ground regularly, which is bad for normal tanks in universes where other tanks can back them up. In a world where it's the only tank on the battlefield and a chaos giant might be about to pick it up like a Hot Wheels toy, you are screwed if that happens. It doesn't quite light itself on fire like a Leman Russ, but it does constantly release steam, which sometimes scalds its crew. Hell, its main cannon is powered by steam. For a tank, it has a very short range, even by Warhammer standards of how close enemies are when they shoot at each other. But none of that matters, at least to some extent. Even if it's truly bad on an objective level, and it is. This is a tank in a setting where no one else has tanks. Its armor might as well be impenetrable. Nothing short of the most insane of Skaven engineering is getting through it. The fuel efficiency doesn't matter either, because looking at this map of the Empire of Man, you can see that 90% of it is forest. They will never run out of fuel. Even if it does get 0.01 miles to the log, there's enough tree to go around. In Warhammer Fantasy, cutting down trees to fuel it is probably a good thing to do anyways, because the trees are full of beastmen. It can vent some of its steam to burn anyone near it in their armor, which I imagine is especially effective against Chaos Warriors. It superheats their cursed armor and boils them like a lobster. And while yes, it can't hold much ammo or gunpowder, so part of its weaponry is powered by steam, you know what else is powered by steam? Basically everything. Every single new method of power generation we find is boiling water. Nuclear power, harnessing almost the power of stars, boiling goddamn water. Who cares if chucking a big metal rock is powered by steam? It still hurts like a bitch. Once again, no Wahapedia screenshot to just show you, so instead here's a picture of a steam tank stuck in the mud while I yammer off rules and stat lines at you. At 265 points, it ain't the cheapest thing in the world, but it's worth the price. Its wheels are AP2, but not against behemoth models, because a Chaos Dragon isn't exactly vulnerable to vehicular manslaughter. It can't march, and because of the steam power rule, it can potentially not fast move at all, and the temperamental rule means on a charge it might lose a wound, halt completely, or both. In exchange for all that bad stuff, you get D3+1 stomp attacks at strength 6. 4 movement, 7 toughness, and an almighty 10 wounds means that no matter what happens, this thing isn't going down easy. At initiative 3, it ain't fighting first in melee, but it doesn't need to. When it does charge in, it's got D6+1 impact hits for some extra oomph, too. The commander has a nice leadership 8, but that's not that important because the steam tank is unbreakable. This dude has full knowledge that he has a tank in a setting where no one else does, and he's on cloud 9 because of it. The steam cannon, sure enough, hits like a tank. It's strength 8, it has armor bane 2 to potentially get -4 to its AP when it shoots, and the steam gun isn't great, but it's only a breath weapon, so it's fine enough for dealing with fools that try and step up to it. The fellas in the tank can also be armed with a Hawkland long rifle for some punch at range, a repeater pistol for multiple attacks, and pigeon bombs to either harm you, do nothing, or potentially blow up all over the enemy. Overall, the steam tank is a tank in a world where no one else has tanks. You should take one. And those were the tanks of Warhammer. Mostly 40k, but with a surprise appearance from Warhammer Fantasy. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the tank to my Warhammer, chugging along and standing tall above the carnage. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching, and take care out there. Land Raider Redeemer? I hardly know her. Yeah, I've ended a video with that like 3 times in the last month. What about it?